Good day, investors. Welcome back. I'm Jared Bowers. Today, we get to dive deeper into the core philosophy that drives everything that I teach and what I do best to practice myself. And that is, everything is investing, as a concept, as a framework, as a philosophy. In the first number of episodes together, we are going to focus on laying out that philosophy, that framework of what is everything is investing. We might and probably will take some side routes that have some fun digressions along the way, because we have a lot of interesting and exciting directions that we can and will go from here. But it's important that we lay out the framework that makes up this approach and this philosophy across all areas that we invest in life, or at least the ones that seem to be pretty important. And that's what we are going to try our best to do as we start out this podcast journey. The importance of establishing this and understanding this framework, this philosophy, is hard to overstate. Understanding that, the foundational concepts, the tools that we have to use, is a critical step in learning and acquiring almost any skill. And that's why before we get into more topic-based episodes, before we really start to dive into examples, apply things directly to the real world, to our lives, talk about case studies, learn from both good and bad examples when it comes to investing, I want to make sure that we are starting from the same foundation of understanding. Because to use an analogy of pilots flying airplanes, when a pilot trains, they don't start out by hopping into a jet and blasting off at 600 miles an hour. They start by learning the systems, the dashboard, the gauges, the dials, the controls, the operating system. And once we understand a system, we're better able to apply the principles in practice. And yeah, I suppose I am likening investing to having the responsibility for passengers in the sky and their lives. But in fairness, that certainly isn't the case with everything that we invest in, or even most things, but that comparison does come down to investing. Investing is lower stakes when it comes to something like money, but those pilots that have responsibility for people's lives invested their way there. If you have responsibility for the well-being of other people in some capacity, you have invested your way there. And you have a precious resource that you need to care for. And regardless of what direction you're coming from, or the outcome that you're trying to achieve, investing and investing well plays a critical role in everything that we do. And if we set the stage well, if we get this, I think that the podcasts are going to click from here. They're going to make sense. No matter where you're starting from, whether you're starting from below zero, or whether you're already in the top decile, or even the top 1% of life, white belt to black belt, so to speak, this framework applies. And as we add tools and strategies and learn how to apply this framework of everything is investing, I'm confident that it will result in good things and in better returns. So with that frame in mind, let's dive in. So, everything is investing. What does it mean? It means that we are all portfolio managers. We are resource allocators. We are choosing, we're picking from a menu of investment options that are available to us every day. Many, many times every day in all that we do. There's this idea that portfolio managers are only people like me who direct resources and make investment decisions on behalf of other people, or have a big portfolio of their own to invest. And that is a very narrow definition of portfolio management, because it's not the case when you look across life. We should look at every aspect of our lives as accounts. Portfolios of resources, of people, of opportunities, challenges that can and should be managed, directed, reallocated, budgeted, bought, sold, trimmed. That makes all of us portfolio managers. Everything is investing means this. Every allocation of your limited resources, your time, your energy, and your money is an investment that produces a return. And those returns can be good or bad, positive or negative. And that's not just metaphorical, it is literal. And I think it's also important to note that there is no neutral. Every action is a deposit or a withdrawal. Every account is either growing or shrinking, and we should grow the ones that we want to grow, and we should shrink the ones that we want to shrink. And we should avoid making deposits into the accounts that should not have deposits. And this concept, this truth that life is a portfolio of accounts, is clearly much bigger than just money. Because most people hear investing and they think stocks and bonds. They think of the stock market, financial statements, company reports, buying and selling at the push of a button. And that's true, those things do apply, but only partly. I'd say maybe that's 5% of the game. Maybe less, depending on your life. Even in my life, the financial markets don't make up that big of a percentage. Bigger than most, maybe, probably. But in terms of how I invest across many other areas, that goes well beyond stocks and bonds. Money, first of all, is just one of the investing macronutrients, time and energy being the other two. And those other two are often more important when it comes to the most important areas that we invest in. Yes, money tends to be involved with most aspects of life. There's really no getting around that. But even when it comes to money, which we all deal with every day, think about how much of your money decisions, your mind share related to money, involve the stock market. Unless you're somebody like me, and again, even if you are someone like me, the answer is probably not a lot. It likely should be, for the average person, very little. You might check your account balance on an average day. You might notice what's happening in your portfolio of stocks and bonds. But the majority of your money, the vast majority of your money-related tasks and investments do not involve stocks and bonds. By choosing where you direct your money, for instance, what you buy at the store, whether you spend money at all, how you use your money during the day to try to solve problems, get what you want, make things easier, that is where most of our time and effort with money is focused. And that is true even in my case. And I work with the stock market as my greatest tool. But don't worry, we're going to talk plenty about the markets, about financial investing as we go forward. And in the very near future, we're going to dive much deeper into what I refer to as the investing macros: time, energy, and money. And this is the part that I hope you realize and grasp now, or will eventually come to understand. That portfolio management is a universal operating system for life. Because we are all managing portfolios, and we can all learn to do it well. Whether we see ourselves as portfolio managers or not is a different thing, but we should. We all practice investing on a spectrum from bad to great in every area of our life, whether we refer to it or think of it as managing portfolios or not. And the same tools and the same strategies that I use to manage multi-million-dollar portfolios are the tools that I use to manage my health, my relationships, my career, my spiritual practices, and my habits. And you are managing the same portfolios of your life with some of those same tools and with some other ones. But it is portfolio management nonetheless. And this brings us to an important concept to understand, which is that not investing is not an option. Or said not as a double negative, investing is the default. It is what we do. We are investors. And therefore, we should be portfolio managers who are managing with intention, with purpose, using useful tools and strategies because we are allocating resources every minute of the day. Every domain of life is its own account that you can make deposits into or withdrawals from. And let's talk at least briefly about some of those accounts at a high level. Let's talk about your bodily health, our fitness. That is a portfolio of inputs that you make and outputs that you require. It is a portfolio of movement and time that is allocated to them. It's a portfolio of ingredients that you put together to make up the food that you eat to fuel your body. Let's consider relationships as accounts. Specifically, let's talk about marriage. That is a portfolio of shared interest, time spent together, service to each other, conversations, mutual trust built over time, mostly through the investment of energy and time. Continuing on the relationship front, I think that friendships are very similar. They work the same way. And our friendships are a portfolio of people that we invest in and who invest in you. Our careers are portfolios of experience, projects, responsibilities, goals that we're working toward, many of which we were able to achieve and had the opportunity to work on because of the portfolio of work that we had put together in the past, in previous jobs and our education. Parenting is another big portfolio. Definitely a portfolio of accounts that require significant investment. And as I think that through, Parenting may be, probably, one of the most one-sided investments that exists. Or is it? Plenty to unpack on that, maybe another time. But those of us who are parents understand the level of investment that is required there and the return that we are trying to get. Healthy, upstanding, well-rounded humans that we can launch into the world. And of course, our finances. That one's almost too easy to talk about as a portfolio of accounts. Not necessarily easy to manage, that can be challenging, but easy to make an example of. We already think about portfolios as money. But the portfolio of our finances makes up so much more than just the holdings in our investment accounts. As we talked about earlier, it's how we spend our money, where we direct it, where it comes from, how we feel about it, which is mostly impacted by what direction those accounts are going. And to get a little bit higher level on the account and portfolio side, how about our spiritual lives? That is a portfolio of the prayers that we say, the people and organizations that we serve and are involved in, the witness that we live, the learning that we do, the books that we read, the practices that we pursue. All of those things tie into so many different accounts of our lives. And the point of all those examples is to illustrate that life is made up of a whole lot of accounts, which together make up our life's portfolio. And we are all investing in those accounts, whether we realize it or not, whether we intend to or not. We are, or at least should be, investing to try to get more of the outcomes that we want and fewer of the outcomes that we don't want. And what do people want in life? Generally, if not specifically, I think people want more happiness, more fulfillment, right? In what they do and the things that they're pursuing. They want to get more out of life. And, oh boy, I realize that this might have backed me into trying to answer the question of how to live a happy and fulfilling life much sooner than might be ideal. But I'm going to make a go at it. I believe that the happiness that you experience and the fulfillment that you achieve are the cumulative returns and the direction of the returns of your investing across the accounts of life that are most meaningful to you. Essentially, to try to boil it down more succinctly, how well you are investing in and toward your purpose. At least that is the best definition that I can come up with right now. And of course, I believe what we are talking about is simply and complicatedly investing. Every outcome in our lives are influenced and are directly impacted by the cumulative account balances of the deposits and withdrawals that we make. Now, as a caveat, I feel like I have to acknowledge whenever I talk about this, that of course not every outcome is perfectly derived from or the direct result of our inputs and our investments. Outliers and edge cases and exceptions absolutely do exist. Because everyone that has had a difficult marriage did not specifically invest their way to it. Everyone who has challenging money outcomes, even bankruptcies or failed businesses, they did not necessarily invest their way into that. Every person who has a debilitating disease did not invest their way into it. I understand this. I acknowledge this. My own mother passed away of cancer that she did not invest toward, as evidenced by the vice-free lifestyle that she lived for her 53 short years. So I am not saying, and please don't hear me say, that every bad outcome is directly your fault. But this is very important. In most cases, it is. Not every case. That's the caveat. But in most cases, most did invest their way into those bad outcomes, those bad situations that they are now experiencing. And this is actually great news. And we'll get into this more in a bit, but it goes both ways. Most of the good and great outcomes in life are also the direct result, or at least heavily influenced by, our investment decisions. There are exceptions in every case, with both good and bad outcomes. But the exceptions do not disprove the overall rule. And that overall rule is that we generally get the outcomes that we invest toward. And I believe that it is more strongly than just generally. Frequently, specifically, we get the outcomes that we invest toward in most areas of life. And that is a very important thing to state clearly early on. Because on one side, it can sound like what I talk about is just a straightforward prescription. If you do this, then you get that. If you don't do this, then you don't get that. And that hard and fast, simplified, directly correlative relationship in every case does not exist in the real world. It probably exists in some areas, and more strongly in some areas than others. Again, there are exceptions, but there is a reason that they're called exceptions. Just because there are outlier cases does not disprove that we get the outcomes that we invest toward. We should not be overly concerned with outlier cases. We should be concerned with what we have more control and influence over, which is how we are directing our investment resources toward the outcomes that we want and away from the outcomes that we don't want, all influenced by the investments that we make and do not make. And the fact that most of those outcomes are the direct result of, or at the very least, the strongly influential indirect result of the investments that we make is good news. I mentioned this before. It is good news because just like those negative examples that I talked through, trouble in relationships, trouble with money, problems with health, mostly invested toward by the people that get those outcomes, the reason that this is good news is because the reverse is also true. And possibly, probably, even more strongly and directly true. The positive outcomes that we get in life are at least influenced and are more often directly impacted, and in many cases directly determined by the deposits and the withdrawals that we make, and the cumulative account balances that we achieve based on those. The healthy and disease-free body that someone has in old age was invested toward in most cases, and they are reaping the rewards of those investments that they've made. The marriage that is stronger and even better than it has ever been after decades was invested toward in the vast majority of those cases. The multi-million-dollar portfolio that allows a couple to live comfortably into their golden years was absolutely invested toward, assuming it was not some sort of inheritance situation. And we will talk about that at some point in the future, inheritance, something that everybody wants, and at the same time, something that most people would likely be better off without. But it's not just high-income people that can get that result of a multi-million-dollar portfolio that they can live on in retirement, or do great things with while they're working. I have many clients who've worked very normal jobs and now have millions of dollars that I manage for them and that they live on because they invested early and consistently. We'll get into more specific examples of that as we go, but I believe that it was important to acknowledge and to talk about that there are exceptions, yes, but the exceptions don't disprove the overall rule. Deposits equal growth. Withdrawals equal atrophy, shrinking, depletion. And we should look at those and acknowledge them for what they are. True very broadly, often specifically, despite the exceptions. And if you consistently make deposits in the have a mediocre marriage account, guess what you are probably going to get? Yeah, probably a mediocre marriage. If you consistently make deposits into the have a strong marriage account, on the other hand, you can also guess what you're likely going to get. If you consistently make deposits into the be unhealthy in 10 years account based on what you consume, how you move or don't move, do not act shocked when that account matures, when that actually results in what you invested toward. Just like you can be confident in the outcome if you make deposits into the be strong and fit into middle-aged and beyond account. Why are you surprised? And that is a key question to ask. And a question that I often ask myself and those that I work with and those that I teach, that I help with their finances. Why are you surprised? It is going to come up frequently as we move forward. Look at the investments that are being made and aren't being made, and you should not be surprised at the balance of those accounts. Now, I'd like to talk more about why this philosophy matters and how it might apply to your life. I believe that even a great philosophy and quality information isn't all that useful unless it can be and then is applied. So my intent with most of what we talk about, both today and going forward, is to relate it and to apply it to real life, with examples, with recommendations, frameworks, build out tools as we go. So let's talk about how everything is investing applies to us. We've talked through some examples already, and what we've mostly covered is that most people's problems and failures come from poor investing, and most people's successes and solutions come from effective investing. So far, there should be no surprises there. I'm confident in assuming that most people want more positive returns in their accounts of life. Most people aren't failing in their problem areas because they're stupid or unlucky. Mostly they're failing because they're investing poorly. And if we can reframe failure as poor returns, that seems like it's something that we can do something about as investors, right? And since investing well is a system and a set of tools that can be learned, someone is only a failure or stupid if they are presented with the opportunity to learn and then they reject it. We've talked about the statistics on average already in the introduction to this podcast. Average health, average finances, average marriage, average fitness, average career outcomes. Being average in most areas of life is actually pretty bad. Probably borderline terrible because you do not want to be average in your health unless you happen to already be in very poor health. And then average is hopefully just a point that you move on past on your way to above average health. You do not want average money or average money outcomes. You do not want average in your finances unless, of course, again, you happen to be in the far below average category, but still, then average is not a target that you should be shooting for. It's something that you move past on your way to something better. I don't think we want to be average in our relationships. We do not want to be average in our fitness. Those are not good states for us to shoot for or to be in. And the average or below average outcomes that we get are not a moral failure or a lack of opportunity in the vast majority of cases. They are an investment failure. Poor allocation of resources, directing those resources toward accounts that they shouldn't be going into, and not making deposits into accounts that should be getting those deposits. The reverse is also true. The above average outcomes that we experience and that we see from those around us are the result of investing. But investing well, investing with intention and discipline and consistency. Okay, how else does this apply to you and to real life? Well, let's talk more about results. Inputs predict outcomes. You grow what you invest in, you get what you pay for. And our trajectory, the direction that we're going, predicts our destination, or our possibilities of destination, at least where we're going to move past on our way to somewhere else. Outcomes are not a surprise, or at least they shouldn't be, like we talked about before. Why are you surprised? We should be able to forecast the good and bad outcomes based on the trajectory that we're on. And understanding that, I believe, is a crucial step. Being able to identify that trajectory is what you need to do to determine whether you're going in the direction that you want or not. The meals that you eat and the workouts that you put in predict the shape of your health and the state of your body 5, 10, 20 years from now. The investments that you make in your relationships through quality time and intentionality predict the shape of those relationships and the state of those relationships decades into the future. Again, why are we surprised? We shouldn't be. Having the tools, which we're going to work through and talk through, and I would like to give you as we move forward, is going to give us what we need to be able to identify those areas and determine how we can better allocate our resources, being eyes wide open about what we are investing toward. That will allow us to clearly see the trajectory and avoid any surprises, or at least most surprises. All right, how else does this apply? Consider this. No matter what, we are investing. Every day, all day long, and it's not just with the things that we do on purpose, or the things that we do that feel like an investment. Because it's easy to see a workout, for example, as an investment. But scrolling Instagram and TikTok isn't thought of that way as an investment, but they are, just like a workout is. It's just one happens to have good results, and the other generally has poor results. The healthy home-cooked meal and the fast food takeout are both investments of time and energy and money in different ratios for different outcomes and for different reasons and purposes. But again, they are both investments. One of those investments is going to get you better returns than the other, especially in the long term. Sometimes, by the way, the fast food meal will be the better return because saving time is the intended outcome and is the most important thing to accomplish with that meal. But if that investment is the one that's made every time, the compounding effects will result in poor outcomes elsewhere. And if we can understand and look at everything that we do during our days and weeks and years as investments, whether we intend them to be or not, that frame is powerful and will result in behavior change for the better. Okay, another reason that this is important and applies, whether you're starting out at rock bottom or below rock bottom in some cases, because there are areas of life that we are adept at digging ourselves into pretty deep holes, or whether you are already in the top 1% of something. There are tools that I will teach you and concepts that we will learn that will result in better returns. Many of my wealthy clients started with very little and now have very much. Many of the people that have the strongest relationships right now that I know started with dysfunctional relationships. Many people that have the healthiest, most fit bodies did not start there. Those outcomes are within reach. And it's not just with money. Another example of how this applies broadly, and something that I want to make clear, is understanding that long-termism, a long-term focus, is the only way to make meaningful progress at anything that really matters. Everything meaningful in life requires long-term consistency and focus. It is a bedrock concept of investing, of portfolio management. I said this in the last episode, but I'll say it again here. Discipline, patience, and effective effort, which are bedrocks of investing, when done together, are rarely defeated over time. If you think that investing is focused on short term, you are mistaken. That's usually a version of gambling. Investing is long term, gambling is short term. And many people do use, maybe even most people in the financial markets, do use the markets as a gambling tool. But that is not how that powerful tool is best applied. And this also applies in life. Long term is the only place where compounding lives. And compounding is one of the most powerful forces that exists. So if we want to access that powerful tool, that powerful force of compounding, we can only do that in the long term. And again, I may have said this enough times already, but I will say it again. It does not just apply to money. Compounding applies to every area of life that is worth investing in. Those small deposits that we make, those little balances that we can establish, are necessary in our path and in our pursuit of building large accounts. And we do that by focusing on long-term strategies. Investing is not a short-term strategy. We really only get positive outcomes consistently over long periods of time by applying these strategies and tools. But the issue is almost everything in the modern world trains us and points us towards short-termism, immediate gratification. And we, together, as we move forward in this podcast journey, are going to try to shift that focus and mindset away from short-termism, which has a very strong gravitational pull, and toward long-termism. Almost everyone, even if they're not involved in the stock market, in public markets, are likely familiar with the most famous financial investor of all time, Warren Buffett. I consider myself a student of Warren Buffett and his philosophy, so I don't want you to be surprised when Buffett comes up with some regularity in what we talk about. But the reason I'm bringing him up now is that it relates to long-term. Buffett is an excellent example of that. He's famous because of two things primarily. He was able to achieve above-market returns, substantially above market returns, for decades upon decades. But therein lies the second reason why you know his name. The first is the market-beating returns. The second is the decades upon decades. It's not just the exceptional returns, it's the decades themselves and how many of those decades he strung together as an investor. Warren Buffett started investing when he was a kid, 10, 11, 12 years old. But he did not achieve his first $1 billion until he was around 60 years old. That still took a while. That's 50 years of investing. Most people that start investing as young adults and then retire in their late 50s or 60s, they don't even get to that 50-year mark as an investor. And you know what? Buffett could have stopped at that point and lived a very comfortable life. But that was 35 years ago. And if he had stopped around 60 years old, when he'd achieved his first billion, we would probably not have ever heard his name. But one of the biggest reasons and why he is one of the wealthiest people in the world and his investment advice is sought after, listened to, if not practiced by as many people as I think it should be, is because he's been doing it for over 8 decades. And that, combined with his excellent returns, has resulted in his massive fortune of over $100 billion. It was the great returns coupled with a very, very long, consistent period of time that he had been doing the same thing, and he remained invested that entire time. Because again, having a long-term focus and long-term investment strategy that we actually follow is the only way to make meaningful progress in anything that really matters. All right. Another way this applies to real life is that we all have the same 3 investment macronutrients to invest. We've mentioned these already, and we invest them all day long, every day. And that is time, energy, and money. Every problem in our life and every success in our life, at its core, is due to an allocation of these resources by ourselves or by other people. At least one, often 2, sometimes all 3. Learning how to invest these very important resources better is going to result in good things. And very soon, in future episodes, actually in our very next episode, we are going to dive deeper into those macros. Another reason why this is important and how it applies to life is that the philosophy of everything is investing explains why hard things are hard and why that is just fine. Actually, why that's a good thing. Related to what we just talked about, meaningful outcomes always have a meaningful cost, from ourselves or from someone else. But that cost of our resources means that we are invested in something. That means that we value it. It means that we care about it. And people often want meaningful outcomes that they have not intentionally invested meaningful resources toward for a meaningful amount of time. And we, as people, often do not invest because it's hard. It takes effort to get going. Sometimes it involves giving up something that we want to keep or that we want to use for something else. But to use a fitness analogy, you don't run a 26-mile race just because you're talented. That may factor in, but you run it and you can run it because even with that talent that you do or don't have, you deposited 5,000 miles or more beforehand. And that is the effort that is put in for the outcomes that we want. Most, not all, but most wealthy people don't just have nice cars and have nice houses and nice vacations because life handed it to them. Most people went without those things for a very long period of time because they were investing in getting to where they're at right now. They put in the reps, they did hard things, they sacrificed. And the great thing about putting in reps and doing hard things is that you don't just make progress because of it. You are more capable of putting in those reps and making even greater progress because you adapt to it and you learn, you get better at it. The same way a runner trains for that long race. The miles don't get shorter, but they do get capable of doing them and doing more of them. We will unpack that more as we go on. Another reason that this applies and that you may want to learn along with me is because most people do want top 1% results. They want them in their health, they want them in their money, in their relationships, in their careers, in the things that are important to them and that they're pursuing. Very rarely do I talk to people who give the impression that they do not want top-tier returns, at least in something in life. Some could care less on the money side, but they want those returns in other areas. But most people are trying to or wanting to achieve those top-tier returns while putting in bottom 50% investments. But top 1% outcomes come from top 1% inputs. Top 1% days come from top 1% hours put in. Top 1% years come from top 1% weeks and months invested. You don't get exceptional outcomes without exceptional inputs. And if you expect top-tier performance with bottom-tier investments, well, get used to disappointment. As we progress forward from here, we are going to talk about how to identify and then make those top 1% investments to get those top-tier returns. And also, in our list of reasons for why this matters and why this applies to all of us, is that our mindset sets our trajectory, possibly more strongly than anything else. We are going to talk a lot about mindset because mindset determines our investing ceiling and what direction we're going. We'll dive deeper into scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset, ownership versus victimhood, the renter versus owner mentality. Do you see the pie is fixed? If someone gets more than you, does that mean there's less for you? I hope not, because that belief would be incredibly limiting. But that wealthy mindset versus poor mindset is a practice. And it's a practice we're going to be talking a lot more about in the future. That's just a brief introduction to that concept. And I firmly believe that wealth is not decided simply by how much money we have. It is strongly influenced and maybe even determined by the mindset that we have when it comes to money and wealth. because that will determine whether you are poor or wealthy in the future, regardless of where you're at right now. You may already be a wealthy person. You just don't have money yet because you haven't given it enough time. Maybe you're young or you're just now getting on the right track, but because you have the right mindset and approach, you will eventually be wealthy. It's putting effective resources through an effective system that results in returns. In that case, I would say that you are a wealthy person. You just happen to not have money yet. And the reverse of that is also true. Regardless of how much money someone has, if they have a poor mindset, if they have a scarcity mindset, they will very likely eventually be poor if they're not poor already. Because again, we are talking about trajectory, the path that we are on. Trajectory is more important than your current state. And all this to me is very interesting, exciting, all the different paths that we are going to go down. We will explore in more detail in the future. But to close things out, I want to talk at least briefly today, or at least to start talking about how we can apply a framework to getting better results, or at the very least, identify our accounts accurately and which inputs and outputs we're getting from them and putting into them. And step one is simply that, to identify your accounts. Ask yourself, what are the key portfolios in my life? The common ones I've touched on already are health, relationships, finances, career, our education. But then ask yourself, which ones actually matter to me as evidenced by my investment in them? And which ones am I pretending that matter to me as evidenced by I'm not actually investing in them? And the way we do that is the next step. Track your current cash flows, so to speak. Your investment flows, your actual behavior. What deposits are you making? What withdrawals are you making? And there are some really powerful and useful methods, tools that we can use to identify those. We can track our time. We can track our money flows. And we can try to identify where our energy is going or coming from. Energy givers and takers. I certainly didn't invent any of these, time logs, budgets, but they are a powerful way to identify your high and low priority areas, because what is revealed by those tools, by tracking where your time, money, and effort goes, what is revealed does not lie. They reveal what you really care about and where your investment resources are actually flowing to. And where we'll spend a little bit more time today in terms of the application of this is what I call a Mindshare Audit. And a Mindshare Audit is an exercise where I want you to ask yourself, where does my mind drift to when I don't have something else specifically at hand to hold my attention? And that probably happens to you multiple times a day. It happens to me in different places. In the shower, everyone's familiar with shower thoughts. I actually just told my wife recently that I need to find or invent a shower-safe sketchboard that I can write down my thoughts on. I need to look up if that already exists. It probably should. And if it doesn't, don't take my investment idea. Actually, do take my investment idea because that'll save me a lot of time and hassle. Sometimes we get our best ideas in the shower or bath because we don't have an active task that's holding our attention. We're usually on autopilot. We let our mind drift. We're comfortable and our mind tends to drift to the things that we care about. Another place that this happens often for me is when I'm driving. Again, on autopilot. I know where I'm going and my mind wanders. And usually my mind settles on the things that I care most about, at least at that time. On the bike is often another place that happens for me. I do some of my best thinking. I've made some of my best decisions while I've been out on the road, riding through the forest. For you, it may be similar or it may be something else. But ultimately, the important thing is, regardless of what you're doing, when you don't have something specific to do, where does your mind drift to? Because what your mind settles on, to think about, to plan, to look forward to worry about, those areas typically represent one of three things. And I want to go through each one of those three things. First, it may represent the things that you spend too many resources on that you shouldn't, which would be an over-allocation of resources, over-investing. Number two, it may represent a thing that you spend too few resources on, something that you should be investing in. This would be an under-allocation of resources. Or number three, it may represent an area where you are investing well, an area of high purpose and high impact. Proper allocation of resources. So first, identify those top 3 things that are on your mind, that your mind settles on in this Mindshare audit. And hold those in mind, or even better, write them down. And then consider that list. And then ask yourself, are those things you wrote down primarily the things that you are over allocating resources to that you shouldn't, under allocating resources to that you should, or properly allocating resources for good results, good returns? If they fall into that first category, those things are probably generating a lot of the wrong kinds of returns, things that we are investing in that we shouldn't be, or that we should be investing less in. If any of those items that you identified fall into the second category, that tends to be an area that you are under allocating resources in, you know you should be investing but you aren't, you are very likely missing out on returns that could be had. And if those things that you've identified fall into, or mostly fall into, that third category of appropriate investment allocation, you are very likely getting good returns in those areas. And as you look at those 3 things that you wrote down, if the majority of them fall into one of those categories, you probably have a good indication of the trajectory that you are on. Whether you're over allocating to things that you shouldn't be, whether you're under allocating to things that you should be, or whether you are properly allocating to important areas of your life, that probably indicates generally the returns that you feel like you're getting. And in most cases, this is certainly true with me, there are improvements that can be made. There are ways that we can invest better. And that is good news. Because let's talk first about that first category that we talked about. If your mind primarily drifts to things that you are spending too many resources on that you shouldn't be, you're over allocating resources. The associated words that come to mind are things like addiction, compulsion, vice, waste, squandered. In some cases, those may feel like words that are too strong, but in other cases, those words may not even be strong enough if they are taken to an extreme. And if invested in over time for long enough, because the time and resources that we invest magnify the account balances, as we've talked about, there's a reallocation of resources that needs to happen if your mind is falling on that first category of things. Now, if you considered what comes to mind and you're thinking about primarily what falls into that second category of things that you are spending too few resources on that you know you should be investing more toward, the associated words with that are words like regret, guilt, unfulfilled, lost, delayed, stuck. Oftentimes, those are errors of omission rather than errors of commission, as in the first category. This second category, the operative word, I believe, is regret or guilt. So many times in life, we know we should be doing something. We should be making an investment, but we aren't. And that is a very important thing to identify and to come to terms with. The fact that we are under-investing in an area that we should be investing in. And now, finally, let's talk about that third category, areas of purpose, of impact, where you are actually making progress. Some recipe of appropriate allocation has been found. You are investing, and you're investing well. The associated words with that category are words like passion, purpose, calling, love, fulfillment, pursuit. And that for me, and I'm guessing for you, is the category that we want to mostly live in. We want to be investing in a way where when our mind drifts, they are mostly drifting to that third category and less on those first 2. And it is purposeful investment, purposeful allocation of our time, our energy, and our money into those things that we care about that results in more of the returns that we want and fewer of the returns that we don't want. And purpose, I believe, is the operative word here. Because if you can't answer the question, for what purpose, how are you going to invest on purpose? And this Mindshare audit, whether you wrote anything down or not, you know where your mind drifts to. You probably know which categories those things fall into: overinvestment, underinvestment, or appropriate investment. And as we build our investor toolkit and we become more effective portfolio managers, we are going to get better at diverting resources away from things that shouldn't have them and investing those resources into the things that should get them and should continue getting them. Things that are going to check the box of purpose, of good investment, of positive returns for a positive outcome. And my intent with this is to provide more framework around the concepts, the philosophy that everything is investing, and at least touch on some of those tools and many of the directions that we're going to go from here. We'll keep building this out. In our next episode, we're going to do a deeper dive into our investment macros, time, energy, and money. I am excited to be doing this. I hope you are excited to learn and pursue this investment with me. And with that, I want to say thank you for investing in yourself and in those around you. I will talk to you next time. And if you're curious, my Mindshare Audit top 3 are currently house building, podcasting, and money.